Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the revived Red Devil's Den podcast. It's me, your host, United Resurgent, one of a few changes we've had around here. I have with me today Daniel at United Dan MUFC, and Vin at InItToVinit05 on Twitter. And go ahead and give them a follow if you haven't already. And to get started, we're actually going to play a little bit of a quiz show with these two. I've got an ex-United player, and I'm going to give them clues about this person's career, and we're going to see if they can guess who it is. And if they can't in the 10 clues that I've got written down, then we'll go ahead and just tell them who it is, and nobody gets the point. Whoever gets it would obviously get the point for today, and we'll see at the end of the season, the long new season, hopefully better than the last one, who has the most points, and they'll be the trivia king of the podcast. And so to get started, I will give you the first two clues, and then we'll go from there. So the first two clues are, I scored 42 goals in 124 appearances. I scored on my debut versus Southampton with a free kick, and my last goal against Newcastle was assisted by Wayne Rooney. Do we have any takers, or should I give you more clues?
124 appearances.
Yeah, so you know it's not just someone random who made 10 appearances and then disappeared, but...
No, I think we might have to go with some more clues.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I've got a couple of names, but I'm not too sure yet.
Sure. I played for 6 different Premier League clubs, including United. If you want, I can give you the next clue, which is the names of those clubs.
Yeah, go on then.
Yeah.
And then
Okay. Newcastle, Fulham, United, Everton, Spurs, and Sunderland.
Yeah. Is it Dimitar Berbatov?
It is not Dimitar Berbatov.
he came into my head as well.
Thank you.
You
for
mentioned
playing.
Fulham, you mentioned Spurs,
Yes.
and I was like, could be.
No, it's not Dimitar Berbatov. I can give you the next one. I also played for Lazio and Metz.
What?
I won 2 Premier League titles and a Champions League with
Is it
United.
Anderson?
It's not Anderson. When did Anderson play in other Premier League clubs?
Oh, that's a good point. I was focusing on your most recent clues. It's just, stupid guess.
Scored 42 goals. He's won the Champions League with.
And he was assisted by Wayne Rooney for his last
Did you
goal.
say he's won a Champions League with us?
Yes. Not match fit when I left United, I offered to train without being paid while I was injured and signed a pay-as-you-play deal with my next club.
I think we're going to kick ourselves when you tell us who this is.
It's kind of that era where United were great. We won the Champions League. Obviously, they were assisted by Rooney, so you know kind of roughly when they were playing.
I'm going to go through the squad now. Scored 42 goals for us, too.
I retired on my birthday in 2013.
Oh.
I was born in Paris and made 20 appearances for France, scoring 4 goals. So now you've got nationality, you've got all the clubs they played for.
Is this Louis Saha?
It is!
You just beat me to it. You just beat me to it, yeah. Wow. I was going to say that. You just got in there first.
It is Louis Saha.
You mentioned France, and I was like,
I was thinking
hang on a second.
Injuries probably would have given it away, which is why I held that clue until so late. Well, I'm glad you got it, because that 10th and final clue was going to be absolutely useless for anyone who doesn't read a lot of football books. It was just that he published a book called Thinking Inside the Box, which was meant to give you that he's a striker. But yes, Louis Saha.
Nice.
And good job, Vin. You got it today. I do love that we had Berbatov and Anderson as previous. Berbatov,
I just ended up.
Understand. I don't know where Anderson came from.
I was just kind of focusing on the later clues, and I just the early ones slipped out of my head. If I'd have thought of them all at the same time, I wouldn't have guessed Anderson.
All right. Well, that kind of ends it for the game, and I hope that people found that somewhat interesting. A little bit of a history lesson before we go on to events of today. That's probably the one time we're going to bring up anything that's happened before summer 2022, because why would we want to think about that on this podcast? And the first topic for today is basically what can we expect next season realistically? Obviously United have had a rough season. There's no hiding from that. Two different managers and results didn't improve. And now we're heading into a new future with Erik ten Hag. What do we think we can realistically achieve in the 2022-23 season? Daniel, what do you think?
So I think you have to look at it in lots of different ways. So, for instance, one thing that's quite obvious that's going to come in, that Eric's going to come in and try and change is our play style. We will not play how we've been for the past few seasons. So I think that's one important thing of the first season. You've got to kind of get the squad used to like the new way of playing, get his ideas across of what he's trying to do, so that when we want to kick on in later seasons, we've really got the way he wants to play nailed down. So I think that's one important part of the first season where he gets that across, gets the team playing how he wants to play. Because it isn't just about league position. If you're going to eventually go on to overhaul City and Liverpool, you've got to start getting the idea of how we want to play through to the team, and then you build on that season on season. So that's kind of from a play style perspective. And then I think another important thing is you've got to try and get Champions League football back. No matter what our window is this summer, we're not going to be challenging in our first season. That's just not going to happen. So you got to look at it step by step. And that first step is getting back in the Champions League football. Whether that is through top four or winning the Europa League, preferably both, just because that means you've had a more successful season, then yeah, we really need to get back into the Champions League. We're already seeing that it's causing us issues in trying to get our transfer targets. So a second year out of it would be a real disaster. So yeah, they're kind of the two main focuses I'm looking at for the first season: get the play style across and get Champions League football back.
All right. Well, that sounds realistic enough. Vin, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's got to be the same metric and the same expectations that we had set under Ollie, where our aim for season was to get back into top four and be up there for a good couple of seasons and be competitive, be the fourth, third, or even be second, as was the case. And then the next step after that would be to challenge for the title. And that also corresponds with our work in recruitment. This summer obviously is huge for us. And part of what expectations we should have depends on how many players we ship out and how many players we sign in. And so obviously you got a lot of free end of contract players leaving the summer. You've got Pogba, Mata, Matic, Cavani, Lingard, and we're looking to sell a few of our players, which honestly we should have sold like 5 years ago. Yet here we are. And so depending on how that activity goes and who we sign in is also going to be a critical factor in deciding, okay, do we aim for top four this season, or do we aim for a trophy this season? Like Daniel said, we'd like to get into top four based on merit in the league, and also end up winning a trophy, either the Europa League or an FA Cup, just to deem it as a successful trophy-laden season. So personally for me, get into top four and see if we can win a trophy, because I think we have the squad, we have the talent to at least go for one of the domestic cups.
Yeah, one of the things Erik ten Hag really emphasized in his first press conference was that United had been relatively successful under Ollie prior to this season. We'd finished second in the league, and he thought there was a lot more potential in the squad than what we had shown this past season. So I looked at a couple of managerial changes in the Premier League and saw kind of what impact we could expect based on that. And if you look at Chelsea when they had the Mourinho season, right? Yeah. The year before they had won the league with 87 points. Then they had a 50-point season, finished 10th. Mourinho was sacked halfway through. He came back. We all know the story. And then the season after Antonio Conte came in, they finished first on 93 points. which is pretty much similar to the year before. So they kind of rebounded to that level.
Yeah.
To have a lower comparison, when the year Pellegrini left, City had finished fourth on goal difference with 66 points, but the year prior they had 79 points. The first season with Pep, they finished on 78 points. So it does seem like there is scope and there's a lot of precedent for kind of re-achieving the levels that you had points wise the year before you lost your manager. And I think with United, that was 74 points dropping to 58. So something in those low 70s is probably quite realistic, I think.
Yeah.
And then that's borderline top four, I think, probably.
Yeah, that kind of point return, you've got a decent chance of getting top four with
Yep.
that.
Yeah, and that's, to me, that's part of it. I don't think you can say, oh, well, he has to get top four. We have to win the Europa League. One of the things that I've found really interesting was, people say Pochettino was successful at Spurs. Well, they went from 69 points down to 64 points in his first season. So there was a little bit of regression. So it's not necessarily that things will start off really well and that's how things have to be. There's definitely scope to take a step back, even possibly, although I'm not sure how much of a step back we could take from where we are right now. Nonetheless, I do think that kind of on the broad scheme of things, you guys kind of have it right. It's going to be a fight for top four and try to make cup runs kind of season, with the ultimate ambition being one, get back in the Champions League, and two, if we can, win a cup or two and try to kind of get that trophy cabinet growing again.
I think without making it too much about the transfer side of things that will come later in the conversation, I think it's really important to have Champions League football back because we're already seeing the effect of what one season out of it is going to do, and 2 seasons will only make it worse. It's going to be more of an issue. So yeah, however it happens, we've really got to get back in the Champions League if possible.
Absolutely. And that actually makes an excellent segue to the second topic, because I think we all pretty much agree on what expectations are for this season. We're going to be looking at essentially what our number one transfer priority is. There was an article in The Athletic that came out earlier today, and essentially the article was saying that United don't really have a specific budget, but roughly speaking, they're working to a net spend of about 120 million pounds. And we all know that we have multiple positions we need to address. So the question that I have for Dan and for Vin is essentially, what is your number one targeted position and who would you sign? Now, normally this would be pretty easy. We could just start naming the best players in the world in those positions, but we have that budget and the other priorities to worry about. So we have to kind of think realistically what the club could possibly do. And with that, I will give it to Daniel. What do you think?
For me, the number one target position has to be a defensive midfielder. We had one in the club for years in Matic. We're losing him, so we don't have any now. We've got to bring someone in. Both Fred and McTominay are eights. McTominay's done his best to kind of hold down the fort until we can get someone in, but it's not his position. I'm sure he might not admit it, but I'm sure privately he probably wants to get out of being playing as the deepest midfielder. So yeah, I think that is a really important position that I'd prioritise over anything else. But at the same time, because we do need multiple positions, you can't go and spend massive amounts on one signing. You've got to think about it. You've got to spend a low enough amount on one signing so you've got room in the budget for others. So yeah, we kind of need to look at mid price range kind of defensive midfielders. See, I think when you have that criteria of taking away the premium options, it gets quite difficult for defensive midfielders. I don't claim to have that much European knowledge of defensive midfielders, so I think I kind of defer to others here. But yeah, we need to look at a kind of mid-price defensive midfielder is what I would say.
Well, that lines up with what I was thinking myself. My position was also defensive midfielder. As Daniel said, we only have one in the club and he's leaving. So really, that's kind of the priority area. It's also the one that I think most would enable us to play with 2 forward-thinking midfield players in front of him, whether that be Bruno Fernandes and Donny van de Beek, or Bruno Fernandes and possibly the signing of Frankie de Jong. Either way, you'd need to have that defensive midfield player in behind. At Ajax, Erik ten Hag's had Lars Schöne back there, and he's also had Edson Alvarez recently. And that's actually where I'm about to go with this. I looked at the landscape for midfielders in Europe, or defensive midfielders specifically, and there's just not really anybody out there that's available for a reasonable price that we could get. Declan Rice is going to cost well over £100 million, which would eat up the entirety of the budget, which is not reasonable. Aurelien Tchouameni is probably off to Real Madrid or Liverpool, depending on what report you look at, probably Real Madrid. And then after that, Boubacar Kamara already signed for Aston Villa.
I suppose it kind of goes in cycles, that you have like a plethora of options in one position and not the other. So for instance, if we had said that central midfield as opposed to defensive midfield was a target, there's loads of options out there. But defensive midfield's a lot harder.
Exactly. Like there's so many eights you can go after. Like for me, I think the pursuit of Frankie de Jong is inevitably going to be unsuccessful. And for me, I would love to see the club target Fabian Ruiz instead from Napoli as a second option. I think Ruiz is a fantastic player, and if we're signing two midfielders, he'd be a great signing. But he's not a number 6, which is what we're looking for. And so to me, the two names that then stood out from what we could realistically get right now are Palhinha at Sporting, who's been very good, but he's not the world's best passer, I think it's safe to say. He's a little bit more in that RDD mold. He does a lot of defending, plays the simple pass as well. He can distribute the long balls to the wings, but if you press him, you can give the ball away. He's not an ideal long-term answer. He's also 26 years old, and he's close to, I think, signing for Wolves right now, I think for the Telegraph, but he was one name that came up. But the one that I decided to go for is actually Edson Alvarez, because he played under Erik ten Hag at Ajax. He probably wouldn't cost more than £30 million, I would imagine. There was a report in Calcio Mercato linking him to Milan for, I think, 20 million euros. So I think that's a little bit too cheap for a player of his quality, but can't imagine to be more than 50% more than that. So kind of that 30 million price tag. So I think he would be a good stopgap until we're able to get back in the Champions League and identify a more fitting long-term target. Also, Laurie Whitwell's article in The Athletic did mention that Erik ten Hag rates him highly and listed him as a potential transfer target. Alvarez is he's good at defensive tasks of being a defensive midfielder, but again, like Palhinha, like Ndidi, he is sometimes sloppy with his passing and also very prone to giving the ball away when pressed. And so he's not ideal. I'm not sure that he's a Champions League winning defensive midfielder, but given the lack of options and the fact that we need somebody for right now, I think at a reasonable price, he could be a good kind of 2-3 season solution.
There is an art in like building on that. So you're saying that he's only potentially a short-term option. You could argue that kind of option allows you to then 2-3 years down the line, when Rice's contract comes down a bit, so his fee comes down, you could then upgrade, get Rice in for that kind of fee. Because while he's not,
Chelsea haven't signed him first,
yes. While he's not an option this summer, if he can hang on a bit, and nobody signs him at West Ham, when his contract runs down a bit, the fee will go down as well. So that could be a route to pursue.
I will say, personally, between the two of them, I actually would have gone for João Palhinha and not Edson Alvarez from what I've seen of the two of them. I also think players from the Portuguese league tend to adapt better to the Premier League than players from the Dutch league. But in this particular case, given we're basically looking for a 2 to 3 year stopgap, someone who knows Erik ten Hag's system probably has a little bit of an edge, and that's why I picked him. But personally, I actually do think Palhinha is possibly a better signing.
I mean, for me as well, defense midfield has to be our priority, and not just because of the fact that we've only had Matic for like 5-10 years, but also the fact that we have Matic and Pogba leaving out of the midfield cohort, which leaves us with like McTominay, Fred, Van de Beek, and that's about it. Who can play in the central midfield positions? Because I'm assuming I'm not mentioning Bruno because he plays up front. But if I look at central midfield, which is occupied by the defensive midfielder and the central midfielder position, it's just McTominay, Fred, and Van de Beek. So all the more reason why and James Garner. Yes.
Daniel can tell us a little bit more about in a minute, but we'll go with Vin for now.
Definitely. I think James Garner has, I believe, should be discussed about in terms of playing time this season. Obviously, Daniel will dig deeper into that. But yeah, for me, you mentioned Wolves, Palhinha going to Wolves. Well, if Palhinha is going to Wolves, then why not we but why can't we think of Ruben Neves from Wolves to Manchester United as an option, even if it's a stopgap for 2 3 years? He's what, I think he's like 24 right now. He's 25 years old, so he's got like a good 4 years in him. And not to forget, he was a very legit option for us last season. And honestly, I felt that last summer, instead of Ronaldo, we should have gone for a defensive midfielder, and Neves was right there for us. But instead, we decided to go for Ronaldo, given the Man City links.
So
But
let me ask you this, Vin.
mhm.
The rumors, I mean, Bruno Lage said something about Neves going for over 100 million. I don't believe that to be true. I think if somebody offered
It's not the case as Declan
60
Rice.
to 80, they'd sell. But do you think that he's the right profile of player for us? Because the way that I see Ruben Neves is kind of as Granit Xhaka, but better, which means he needs someone more mobile to do a little bit more of the defending, and he dictates the pace of the game as the 8. So I would see him more as an alternative to Frankie de Jong than an alternative to Rice or Chouameni. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, but if I look at Frankie de Jong, he's more for number 8 than number 6 for me.
That's what I'm saying. I think Neves is a little bit more of an 8 than a 6 as well.
Yeah, but then if I've looked at Neves playing for Wolves, and given like last season under Nuno, the setup that Wolves used to play in was a more defensive 4-5-1-ish, and Neves would often be like the lone pivot in that formation. And the number of times that I've watched him, I have seen that he's got the physicality, and he's got the energy to play that lone pivot position, which is exactly what we're kind of hoping for. Because ultimately, if you want to shift to a 4-3-3 with one holding and then 2 8s up front, you need someone who's got the kind of energy and the physicality to cover all aspects of the ground and not rely on another person, to complement or formation last season.
So the person that I'm thinking of, or the way that I think about Wolves, is with Dendoncker and Neves kind of sitting in front of that 3, and Dendoncker doing the more physical work and Neves doing more of the passing and distributing. But I guess I can kind of see what you mean, that did change a little bit last season.
Yeah.
After the managerial change there.
But yeah, so so yeah, I mean, he definitely can do it, and he's been someone who has impressed me like for the past couple of seasons, and I've low-key wanted him at United and wanted us to go for him as a defensive midfielding option. But even if we don't go for Ruben Neves, yeah, the issue is the names out there, they're not that many, and the ones that are there, they are extremely expensive and will eat up most of our budget. I think one of the names that was discussed in one of the articles was Lisandro Martinez from Ajax. He's been touted as this versatile central midfielder player who can also play defensive midfielder, the position of as a number 6 pretty well, and he's done that in Ajax on a few occasions under Ten Hag. So, and he's
Typically,
22, 23, I think. So he's not a
typically
bad option.
Lisandro Martinez will play on as a left-footed center back, and you'll get Edson Alvarez playing in midfield. But yeah, sometimes he has filled in midfield. It just seems like, at least at Ajax, Ten Hag saw his primary position as being as a center back. But I will say that he is like 5'9" tall, so he's probably more suited to the Premier League as a defensive midfielder. I can see where you're coming from with that. There's just a lot of names that are not perfect and have their own flaws. And I think we all agree this is the position of the most need, but there isn't like a perfect solution out there.
Yeah. Do you guys remember Abraham Sangare?
I do. He's actually one of the other people I looked at when I was looking at João Palhinha and Edson Alvarez. I just feel like if we're going to go for a Dutch league defensive midfielder, though, why not go for one who's already played for Ten Hag successfully?
Exactly. Yeah, that's another name that I came across. But yeah, I mean, it's not like there aren't any options. We just have to look and carefully select the right one, and hopefully for the right price.
Absolutely. I mean, we've gotten through that pretty efficiently, surprisingly. So then let me ask you, we've talked about that one midfield position. We all know that United are looking at 2 midfielders based on reporting from Telegraph Ducker and from Laurie Whitwell with The Athletic, relatively reliable reporters who get their news directly from the club. Do we think that this chase of Frankie de Jong is going to be successful ultimately? And if so, I mentioned Fabian Ruiz as my preferred alternative. Is there someone out there that you guys would look to sign instead?
So with regards to De Jong specifically, I don't think it'll be successful either, but I kind of think the reason why they're continuing to push and they haven't given up is that they want to send the message that they're backing Ten Hag, they're trying to get what he wants. And then if the player decides he doesn't want to come, that's out of their hands. Then they can say, well, we did everything we could to back the manager with his first choice signing. And it was only through things that wasn't in our control that we had to move on to plan B. And I think that's why we're continuing to push and we haven't just given up. I think, for an example, so just because he's the previous manager, if Ollie was still here, I wouldn't be surprised if we'd already moved on to plan B. But because Ten Hag's new, it's his first window, I think they're trying to really say, we're backing him, we're trying to get what he wants. And so they might have given up a bit sooner, if that makes sense.
So this is somewhat off topic, but Daniel's comment that Ollie was the previous manager, if you guys have seen Arrested Development, at certain points, when Job has done something that he's particularly not proud of, he'll go to a local store and buy something that he calls a forget-me-now, and he'll just take one of these pills so he can't remember what horrible thing he just did. And I think Daniel just took one of those to forget the entire Ralph Rangnick era. It's 6 months blotted out of history.
It was actually.
I don't remember the season at all.
It was more just because I was thinking permanent manager, but yeah, I like your answer better.
I mean, it's just that was such a disastrous 6 months. My God, let's just hope he's better as a consultant than as an.
I think that's going to be a whole another episode of itself.
Oh,
the 6 months of Ralph Rangnick.
that article from The Athletic was absolutely devastating. But yeah, we've talked about midfield a decent bit here. I think, Vin, do you think the De Jong pursuit is going to be successful?
It doesn't look like it's going to end up with De Jong coming over to United, simply because of the reports that have come out so far saying that United are interested, but De Jong doesn't want to leave. He has no intentions of leaving, but the only reason why he might are dishing him out. And so
Vin, your connection is kind of being a little bit iffy there. But yeah, I think we all agree that Frankie de Jong's not really happening. As far as alternatives go, as I mentioned, I love Fabian Ruiz. He's kind of part of my three, kind of that skewer in the kebab. That's my personal favorite players who don't play for United. Pau Torres at the back, Fabian Ruiz in midfield, Dusan Vlahovic up front. And so for me, I would love to sign Torres and I would love to sign Fabian Ruiz. And
You're
so
only getting Torres from that, possibly. Let's be honest.
Ruiz would be wonderful as an alternative for De Jong if we can't get him. Are there any alternatives to De Jong that you guys are particularly interested in? Yuri Tielemans is on the market.
Yeah, Tielemans, I was just going to mention.
Tielemans would be a good shout out, yeah. For me. I haven't looked at any of the other available number 8s or central midfielders that we are active.
Okay, and it's cutting out again. Sorry, Vin. Yeah, your voice just cut out there again. But anyways, so other than Tielemans, Daniel, was there anybody else you were particularly interested in?
So I wasn't particularly sure. So this is why I mentioned it to you before about how we view Neves. So he was on my list as well, but I wasn't overly sure which list you put him in. If he's more of the defensive midfielder, if he's more of the 8s. So yeah, he's just on my list of kind of a general midfield target of someone we can look at.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tielemans and Neves are both fantastic players. I would say Neves is kind of a 6.5, if that makes sense. He kind of, or an 8 or 7.5, whatever you want to call it, something between a 6 and an 8.
Yeah,
he's not really a 7. That would be a winger, but you get what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
To me, he has some of the tendencies of a defensive midfielder, but he's still a little bit more of an 8. You probably could play him as a 6. Bruno Lage has done it, but I don't know. I don't view it as a highly sustainable thing necessarily at the top level. Just on him on his own with, say, Van de Beek and Bruno Fernandes in front, it just seems like he'd be on his own in an island. But it's definitely a possibility. But yeah, those are some good midfielders. I think why don't we close by just talking about Jimmy Garner really quickly? So Daniel, tell us a little bit about how Garner's been getting on and how you think he fits into the squad. You know, we all know that he was kind of a little bit of a 6, a little bit of an 8 in the past. Does he really fit into either one of these buckets neatly, or is he still an option for both?
So I definitely in the past considered him to have the skill set to be able to play either, but I think now he really is an 8. It's cemented that he's further forward now than he was before. He's a real box to box midfielder. As for his next season, I don't think there's an inherently bad option. I think let Ten Hag assess him in pre-season, then he either gets a Premier League loan where he plays every week, or Ten Hag sees enough in him that he thinks he's ready already, and then that's self-explanatory why that's really good for us. So yeah, I don't think there's really a bad option for him. Either way, he'll be in the Premier League next season, and we get to see what he can do. It's not his first time playing against Premier League opposition, so he played against 3 Premier League teams in the Cup this season, and he did well in all of them pretty much. So we've known he can hold his own against Premier League opposition. Obviously, you need a bigger sample size than that, but the early signs are good. So yeah, I'm confident that he will cope well in the Premier League. Then the only question remains is what is his ceiling at United? Is it does he long term become a starter, or is his long term going to be a squad player? But yeah, I think he has the potential to make it here.
Okay. I mean, I think we're all optimistic about his chances moving forward. One of the things I did mean to ask you about is a lot of the articles I've read on James Garner the last couple of days have mentioned him being the more defensive of the 2 in midfield for Nottingham Forest. I know they usually play with 3 at the back.
I don't agree with that
Garner.
personally. I think he
Okay.
gets forward a lot. Yeah, so
I think that's
I
maybe
would
just a consequence of the 3 at the back system, that in a 3 maybe he can be a 6, but in a 4 he's more of an 8, kind of like that Ruben Neves type of issue.
potentially, yeah, but I would definitely say if we are looking at how he would translate to us, that he would be in the like box to box role.
Okay, well, that definitely gives us another option. And Donny van de Beek's returning from loan. He can play as an 8 as well. We've obviously still got Pastor Fred kicking around. I honestly feel like even without a signing, the 8 position is really not a massive priority. It would be nice to have someone who can dictate play, and Frankie de Jong does it extremely well, and I'd love to have him. But I mean, it's not really an area that I'm super enthused about getting a signing in for. We've talked about the 6, and then we've obviously already got Bruno Fernandes doing the job as our number 10. So that kind of is a little bit of a good discussion on the midfield for today. We'll look at other positions and other transfer targets in coming podcasts in a week or two. But this has been the Red Devil's Den podcast. Please follow us at the Red Devil's Den on Twitter. Please follow myself at United Resurgent, at UTD Resurgent, that is. Please follow Vin at init2vinit05. Please follow Daniel at United Dan MUFC. And we'd love to have you be part of our conversation. We're glad to be back. And I think it was a good podcast. Thank you so much, everybody.